Thank you for joining us and getting us through the magic of Zoom this morning. Before we go on much further, let me introduce John Scholes from the DSA. John?
Thanks, Essex, and thanks, James, and to our team for pulling this together. Of course, thanks to our candidates for joining us, and welcome all of you. Welcome DSA members and guests as well, and members of the public to our City Council Candidate Forum. I just wanted to share a little bit about our process. The Downtown Seattle Association has sent all candidates for City Council races and mayoral candidates as well a questionnaire, and we're engaging in an evaluation process and a rating process of candidates. That questionnaire was sent several weeks ago to all candidates, and it had one question, which was, what's your plan for downtown recovery? Recognizing the economic impacts to so many different sectors and workers in our downtown from this pandemic over the last 16 months. We want to better understand the individual plans and perspectives and priorities of candidates for office and how they will help to rebuild and renew and reimagine our downtown, which is a place that's home to major corporations and employers, as well as 14,000 small businesses. It's the center of our region's arts and cultural sector, home to 84,000 people that live downtown, home to trade, and the center of our region's light rail and transit system. More than a third of the low-income housing in the city is also located in downtown. So we have a lot at stake, and we believe it's in everybody's interest for downtown to be healthy, thriving, and vibrant once again, and we want to better understand the plans and priorities of candidates for office. We've shared the responses to those candidates who took the time to respond and sent us their completed questionnaire. Those are on our website. We appreciate the candidates taking the time to do that. We understand that you're getting questionnaires from lots of different organizations and interests across the city. So thanks to all who've taken time to fill out ours. You can go on our website and view those responses. And then in the coming weeks, we will have ratings for all candidates for council and mayor. And with that, I will turn it back to Essex and Chris. We really appreciate both of you taking time to moderate today. Essex Porter is a veteran news reporter in our region, more than 3 decades at Cairo, and was awarded the National Academy of Television Arts and Sciences Silver Award in 2016. Chris Daniels has more than 2 decades of experience in Seattle at King 5. He's chief reporter there and leads King 5's political coverage. And he's a graduate of Curtis High School down in University Place, my alma mater as well. Go Vikes. I don't get to introduce you often, Chris, so I got to get that in. Thank you for taking the time, Chris and Essex. Thanks to you all for being here, and thanks to candidates for putting themselves out there to run for public service in our city.
Thank you, John. Welcome, everybody. Glad to see so many of you joining, and hope that this program will help you understand the candidates better. For the next 90 minutes, we're going to discuss issues that are important to the many people in downtown Seattle. Basically, each candidate will get 1 minute to answer each question, 30 seconds for each candidate for rebuttal. We'll try to make clear, because of our Zoom environment, who's getting the question, and we'll also try to cue you for the rebuttal. We'll try to gently warn you when you're running out of time. And if you go excessively long, we can cut your mic off. Chris?
And as John mentioned, I'm Chris Daniels from King 5. We are joined today by 2 of the candidates for Seattle City Council Position 9, Nikita Oliver and Sarah Nelson. Nikita Oliver is a community organizer, cultural worker, artist, and attorney. Nikita has lived in Seattle since 2004 and has served as a community support and cultural worker with Urban Impact, the Union Gospel Missions Youth Reach Out Center, the Urban Youth Leadership Academy, Seattle Urban Academy, Who's Next, Year Up, and Writers in School. They are currently Executive Director of Creative Justice, an arts-based healing engaged space for youth, an adjunct professor at Seattle University School of Law, and provides pro bono legal services and supports for low-income communities. Nikita Oliver was a founding member of the grassroots Seattle People's Party. Her campaign website is nikita49.com. Sarah Nelson is the co-owner of Fremont Brewing, which she co-founded with her husband in 2009. Fremont Brewing currently has over 70 full-time employees. She's lived in Seattle for more than 30 years, and she and her husband have 2 teenage sons. Her public sector experience includes serving as legislative advisor with the Seattle City Council, working for former council member Richard Conlon for close to 10 years. During that time, Sarah worked on legislation on land use, environmental, transportation, and economic development. She earned a PhD in cultural anthropology at the University of Washington and taught courses in the departments of anthropology and women's studies, as well as the Jackson School of International Studies. Her campaign website is sarahforcitycouncil.com. A third candidate, Brianna Thomas, wants to make it clear that she was unable to make it today due to a scheduling conflict. Her campaign manager, Libby Watson, is here now with a statement before we begin. Libby.
Thank you so much. And thanks so much for holding this forum and for allowing me to speak on her behalf. Good morning. I'm Libby, I use she, her pronouns. Brianna Thomas is the council member that Seattle needs in this pivotal moment. Equitable economic recovery is something that she's been advocating for and will absolutely be a top priority once elected. This means prioritizing our small businesses, which are the backbone of our economy and community. It also means prioritizing the arts and entertainment industries, including tourism and hospitality attractions. Over the past 5 years as council staff, she's worked side by side with labor, community activists, and business leaders across our city to enact policies that have put Seattle at the national forefront of police accountability and workers' rights. She's demonstrated her commitment to working families with wins like the nation's first $15 minimum wage and the secure scheduling ordinance. She understands the importance of revitalizing our economy because those workers she's fought so hard for need somewhere to work. A higher minimum wage is only effective if there's a business providing that wage. We've been meeting with small business owners to hear what they're worried about. We know that we need to urgently address homelessness and public safety in order to support downtown recovery. Brianna's not an abolitionist, and while she won't lie and tell you that she doesn't want reforms to our criminal justice system, she knows there's a very real problem of public safety, especially downtown. She has the policymaking and coalition building experience to do the work of criminal justice reform that keeps everyone safe on day one. Brianna looks forward to working with the DSA to create systems that allow businesses to flourish. We know that there are some candidates that are picking and choosing who to engage with on the campaign trail. Our campaign has been working diligently to keep up with the 90+ community groups and organizations that have reached out since February. We've been engaging with you in this process and will continue to do so. If she's elected, her door will always be open and she'll be willing to have good faith dialogue with DSA and the wider business community. Due to the impacts of the pandemic, nearly 200 downtown businesses have permanently shut their doors, including many with BIPOC owners. That's why she will propose a temporary abatement of B&O taxes for new small businesses that start up downtown, so we quickly fill those empty storefronts. With the viaduct gone, we have a unique opportunity to build ground floor retail, and she looks forward to working with Friends of the Waterfront on projects like this. The council should continue to simplify and improve permitting processes for businesses, like we saw with the extension of outdoor dining and safe street permits. The council can also more adequately fund the Office of Economic Development, which is a currently very underfunded but incredibly important resource. Brianna will provide real results, not just rhetoric. Thank you so much for letting me speak on her behalf, and we look forward to talking more.
Thank you very much, and we'll continue our introductions. We flipped a virtual coin, and Nikita Oliver gets to introduce herself first. When you ran for mayor 4 years ago, you ran a strong race. You're now running for council. As you introduce yourself, tell us why you think you can make more of an impact as a council member.
Good morning, and I just want to say I use they, them pronouns and appreciate the opportunity to be here. My name is Nikita Oliver, and I'm choosing to run for Seattle City Council because I think legislation and our budgeting are policy decisions that deeply impact the lives and material conditions of our workers, our folks without homes, and will have a deep impact on the racial wealth gap. It is a strategy decision on the part of the movement to decide to make a run for a legislative position. And I've been doing legislative work for a long time as a grassroots organizer and as a lawyer. I have a deep understanding of the process and have actually deeply impacted budgetary investments from the outside. I would like to do that from the inside now. And specifically, I chose to attend this forum today because I think it's important that the voices of workers, renters, and those without homes are brought into places where our lives may be discussed, but our voices are not always heard. The reopening of downtown should be about protecting and uplifting our most vulnerable workers, workers who make downtown work. And if our policies don't prioritize their safety, dignified working conditions, prevailing wages, transportation, housing, and benefits, then we've failed to do what is absolutely necessary, not just to recover from this pandemic, but to ensure that we never see a crisis of this magnitude again. So I would like to contribute to seeing our city open in a way that prioritizes the needs of our most vulnerable, understanding that that is who has borne the weight of all of the crisis we're in, but those crises now as they've been exacerbated by COVID-19.
Thank you. Sarah Nelson, you've been running a successful business for several years. You have served at City Hall as a key council aide. Why now move back from your successful business to try to run for city council?
Well, I'm running for city council because Seattle's going in the wrong direction, and I'll bring the experienced, pragmatic leadership our city needs right now. I'm the only candidate in this race with a background in both public service and the private sector. And that's important because I know how good policy is made by paying attention to details and involving stakeholders when crafting legislation. And I've also seen the negative consequences when council does not take into account that input. So Fremont Brewing was hit hard by COVID, but we managed to retain all our employees and we increased their wages to make up for lost tips, but other businesses weren't as fortunate, as your members know. That's why economic recovery is my top priority. And we've got a lot of work to do to forge an equitable long-term recovery in this town. But simply hoping that downtown will bounce back is not a plan. My proposals for downtown's recovery focus on public safety, as well as a long list of other things, because too many businesses have left town or closed because of crime. It's appalling that our council president gloated in The Stranger about refusing to submit her DSA questionnaire, and it's telling that her chief of staff isn't here today. And that's on top of council voting to reduce rescue plan funding for downtown. I'm here because I know how important downtown is for jobs and for Seattle's tax base to pay for things like basic city services that we all depend on. So we've got to get over this us versus them attitude toward the business community. And it's time for the voice of a small business owner on city council. If elected, instead of abandoning you, I will partner with DSA to bring downtown back, because that is the city's job.
Thank you. Let's move on to questions. Sarah, the first question goes to you. The next city council will be asked to confirm a new police chief. What qualities and experience do you want in that new police chief? What public safety policies do you want the new chief to commit to pursue before you vote for that person as chief?
Well, first I have to say that it's a shame that we're even in this position. Council's defunding efforts drove our first Black woman police chief out of her job. So first of all, I hope that we get someone with her qualities that represents both the community and the best intents of the police department, who is willing to abide by and set a new standard to comply with the consent decree, and who is also focused on reform. It's clear that we do have to reform the police, that we do have to address systemic racism in policing, and also protect community safety. And we can have it all. Carmen Best said that we can walk and chew gum at the same time. So I will be looking for someone who is focused on that, on reform, and to coming to the bargaining table to establish, to establish new disciplinary protocols to ensure that officers who conduct misconduct and abuse of force are held accountable and disciplined appropriately.
Okay, and for Nikita Oliver, same question. what do you want in the next police chief? And what sort of policies do you want them to commit to in order to get your vote for confirmation?
Yeah, I want to start first by acknowledging the really problematic use of identity politics. Yes, Chief Best is a Black woman, and yet chose to take a job in an institution that is categorically failing at its role to create public safety. A candidate in this role would need to understand that policing is inherently steeped in institutional racism and that prisons and policing have done harm both historically and presently. They would have to grasp that the budgetary priorities of the city are out of alignment with its stated race and social justice goals, and that police are presently asked to execute a number of functions that don't make society safer. Like any elected official, an ideal candidate for office of Seattle Police Chief would have to have a demonstrated commitment to anti-racism before seeking employment as a head of the city's police force, and should demonstrate serious engagement with the current societal discourse on police abolition. And ideally, this candidate would entertain the possibility of working themselves out of a job in the future, because we will have created such an effective intervening and preventative public health and safety system that their job would need to change.
Sarah Nelson, 30 seconds.
Well, Nikita, last week you said that 1.3% of the calls that come into 911 are about violent crimes, and the rest were things like parking issues and domestic violence and noise complaints. And in fact, violent crime is 5% of emergency 911 calls, which don't include parking and noise complaints. And the rest are things like arson, human trafficking, and abduction. And last week you tweeted, want to end violence, end poverty. All right, but what do we do in the meantime? The bottom line is that we need good policing and not ideological posturing.
Nikita Oliver, 30 seconds.
Sarah, I think your comments are very steeped in racism. We have a racial wealth gap in this city that is creating intense differences in access to material conditions that are failing to meet the basic needs of communities. The lack of access to those needs actually exacerbates violence. Violence doesn't cause poverty, poverty causes violence. And to respond to your issue around the numbers, that was 2019 data. So it would be interesting to know which data you got and who it came through, because how we disaggregate data is going to impact what it says.
Thank you both.
And let's build off this topic and continue on this topic. Nikita, starting with you, the Seattle Police Department had their budget cut last year and has had significant attrition in the past year and a half, causing leaders in that department to suggest that they'll soon have a staffing and response time crisis. So if elected, how will you approach the need to balance public safety downtown with the obvious momentum to reimagine the police department?
Well, let's put this in perspective. In 2010, the Seattle Police Department's budget was half than what it is now. It has doubled since 2010, and yet public safety has not actually increased. What has increased is a lack of access to affordable housing. What has increased is the number of people being forced to live outside. What has increased is the racial wealth gap. If we take seriously preventing violence and caring for communities, we will actually make huge investments into building infrastructure to meet basic needs, get people housed, have affordable transportation, and ensure that people have access to meaningful, gainful employment, mental health care, and drug and supports for those who use drugs. What we've done instead is continue to further give more money to an ineffective system of public safety, and then expect them to respond to concerns like mental health crisis or even domestic violence that they are not equipped to deal with and oftentimes actually exacerbate. The problem is we've been using the wrong strategy. So yes, the department is decreasing in size, but the problem with public safety is not that we have less police officers, it's that we are going for the wrong root causes.
Sarah?
Could you please repeat the question?
Yes, so the Seattle Police Department has had their budget cut this past year, has had significant attrition within the department, causing leaders to suggest that they'll soon have a staffing and response time crisis. So if elected, how will you approach the need to balance public safety downtown with the obvious momentum to reimagine the police department?
I would argue that we already do have a crisis in response times, which are 14 minutes for priority 911 calls. We don't want to become Kent, where a woman died because she was being beaten, and the cops arrived at 52 minutes after the first call. So we have got to ask the question, what's it going to take to keep communities safe? How do we ensure that officers are treating our community members with respect and dignity, and address systemic racism? And then just let's do that. And that starts with reimagining the police, reforming the police, and then budgeting accordingly so that we don't get into staffing issues. Well, more staffing issues. So so we could, for example, restart the Seattle Police Academy. This has kind of been off and on over the years. Police do need more training. We need more officers recruited from the neighborhoods that they will eventually serve. We can do that through incentives. This will overcome language and cultural barriers. There are things that we can do to reform the police and keep everyone safe. That is the goal, public safety, and keeping intact our response times.
We're at time with this question, Essex. I think you have a follow-up as well.
Yes, and Chris, remind me, I just wanted to be sure we got to our rebuttals on this question.
Well, we can, Nikita, if you'd like 30 seconds to rebut what Sarah just had to say.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have a crisis in response times. We have a crisis in what Seattle Police Department is choosing to prioritize. I think they're intentionally at times creating a crisis to make it seem like that, to create hysteria in the city. If you look at what happened from 2020 into 2021, there was a lot of over-policing of protests rather than actually responding to crisis calls that came into 911. This is why we propose having a civilianized 911 system that has a menu of options that people can access: Health One, mental health supports, and domestic violence supports that actually meet the needs of domestic violence survivors. 60% of DV survivors say what they would have preferred was access to safe, affordable housing so they could get out of the situation they were in, rather than police intervention or court.
And Sarah, 30 seconds.
So I just wanted to mention that the stats I was referring to earlier come from CSTAT. So that's, if you want to check my math, you can go there. But basically, we do have a crisis. And I certainly do not want people to be wondering if the police will show up when something is happening. I will focus. There is a dashboard that that shows how much of the police accountability ordinance from 2017 has been implemented. 32% have not of the elements of that ordinance have not been. So I think that is the perfect place to start when we're talking about improving public safety in Seattle, making sure that the community's needs are met and that everyone feels safe.
Thanks, Sarah. Essex?
Yes, thank you all. And let's continue with public safety in downtown, because, you know, just before the pandemic closed so much down, there was a downtown shooting that happened during rush hour. There was a very quick police response to that shooting, a response that likely prevented the incident from getting even worse. Nikita Oliver, you pledged to divest from policing. Sarah Nelson, you pledged to focus patrols on neighborhoods that have been neighborhoods beyond those that have been historically overserved. So does that all add up to fewer police officers downtown? And how would you keep downtown safe with fewer officers? Sarah, you are the first to answer this question. 1 minute.
I'm not sure where I conveyed that, because I believe that we need to allocate our resources where they are most needed. And when the police came immediately to that shooting, right now they are sending police officers from precincts all over town. That shows that there is a shortage of police officers. So we need to make sure, I do not support defunding the police. I support improving the police and making sure that resources are available to respond quickly and locally to those calls, because things are happening all over town, and this is a big city, and we cannot afford to spread our force so thin.
And I should say that what I quoted there, neighborhoods beyond those that have been historically overserved, comes directly from the issues portion of your website. Nikita Oliver, I quoted from the issues portion of your website as well. When you pledged to divest from policing, would you address the question, does that mean fewer police officers downtown? And if with fewer officers, how would you make downtown safe?
Yeah, so one thing, I want to acknowledge that the collective bargaining agreement that Seattle Police Department has purposely negotiated has gotten in the way of accountability legislation, to address the last question. But on this particular question, divestment does not mean that we abandon our communities to violence. What it means is we actually get deeply invested in anti-violence work. Anti-violence work is about preventing and intervening. Our current public safety system is about reacting. And we want to get to a place where we're addressing the root causes of why violence exists in the first place. It often happens because people are in exacerbated conditions where they lack the supports and services that they need to address mental health crisis, to address economic and employment issues. When I say that the root cause of violence is poverty, this is not an extrapolation. It is a sociological fact that many people have studied. And so as a part of the anti-violence movement, I take violence so seriously that I don't want to continue to be in a reactionary system that waits for harm to occur. I want to see and develop a system that addresses, intervenes, and prevents harm before it starts. And in order to do that, we need to be able to build the end community infrastructure and the city infrastructure to build those responsive systems and supports that make that possible. If we continue to invest $410 million a year in Seattle Police Department and even more in the larger criminal punishment system, we will continue not to have the resources needed to do that. And we will continue to put people in a cycle of recidivism that only means they will continue to have contact with police and courts, which will lead to more violence.
Nikita, yes, I should stop you there. And Sarah Nelson, 30 seconds for rebuttal.
Well, again, we have to focus on specifics. Going after the root causes, I believe we have to do that as well, but we've got a crisis right now. Downtown businesses, I heard from one building owner that security costs have gone from 80 cents a square foot to $5. The city has abandoned downtown, has abandoned the needs of the residents and the businesses down there, and this has got to stop. So let's talk about real solutions. I've already mentioned a couple of them. One thing for police reform would be to get rid, and this would have to happen at the state level, of binding arbitration. That is how we can really hold police accountable. Unfortunately,
let me stop you there because we're at time for 30 seconds. And
okay.
Nikita Oliver, 30 seconds.
Yeah, the folks I think we've abandoned are folks without homes and people caught in the racial wealth gap and those who lack affordable housing. Solutions are civilianized 911 with a broader menu of options, expanding Health One and giving it its own phone number so that people can call Health One rather than always feeling like they have to go to 911 until we have that civilianized option. And then making sure that the next collective bargaining agreement we negotiate actually reflects the needs of community and impacted residents over that of police getting a say in what accountability looks like.
Thank you both. Chris?
Yeah, let's talk more about public safety and the demonstrations in the wake of George Floyd's murder. There was a violent event which caused a lot of damage on May 30th of 2020. There were also multiple peaceful demonstrations and gatherings in downtown in the days after on a near daily basis, yet on more than one occasion, vandals destroyed windows and caused property damage downtown to small businesses and storefronts. Nikita, you have a unique perspective in this debate because you led or participated in many of the peaceful demonstrations, including one I can remember that brought thousands of people outside City Hall in what was an impressive call for actionable change. I am curious what you thought about those people who weren't necessarily connected to any of the demonstrations, who lashed out violently at downtown businesses.
I think that there is a huge confluence of things happening. And what we're ignoring is at the time of those demonstrations was also a major economic recession. So some of the issues that we saw were break-ins for the purpose of stealing liquor or stealing other things to sell. People in extreme situations of poverty, trying to get access to resources. And the real question when it comes to those communities is, what are we going to do to meet their basic needs? In regards to things that we saw during the protests, I think it's really important to acknowledge that we don't build policy based on extremes, and to get caught up in the media narrative that actually blasted those images more than they did those of marches that happened without any incident shows that we've actually created a type of hysteria rather than addressing the real issue, which is why are police still killing Black and brown people? When we have these conversations, we detract from the real issue, which is the issue of racial justice and the problems of policing. Many of those businesses have access to insurance that will ultimately repair the things that they're facing. When we talk about Black and brown people murdered by police, there is no amount of insurance that will ever return that person back to life.
Sarah Nelson, same question. I'm curious your thoughts on what you saw this past summer in terms of the demonstrations and the people who were not part of the peaceful demonstrations that were lashing out at downtown and small businesses.
I fully support peaceful protest, and I thought that it was appalling that the protesters just went that took out their feelings on small businesses. This is not hysteria. This is reality. And when windows are broken and businesses go out of town, that hurts poor people. No Bartell drugs, no IGA. Where are those workers now? So I was pleased that Diaz, in I think it was January, said, all right, we're going to get tough on protesters. I don't want to read another story about Nordstrom's windows being smashed. I don't want to read that they have left their flagship store downtown. We have got to protect everyone downtown, the 82,000 residents, the workers, and the businesses from this kind of crime.
Nikita?
It is very much media hysteria when that's the only images that are put out regarding what's happening in the streets. It creates a false narrative. I would also like to say this tough on protesters has a chilling effect on the First Amendment rights of community members. And if we actually believe in protecting the First Amendment rights, we wouldn't just be out snatching people out of the streets, putting them in jail during COVID-19 and expecting that that would not spread a public health crisis through many areas of our communities. And most of those folks ultimately were not charged. So we probably arrested them with no reason to arrest them in the first place.
And Sarah?
I would say that most people committing crimes like this were not arrested. And I don't know about a false narrative, et cetera. All I know is that as a small business owner, it's really difficult to allocate resources to replace doors and windows and stolen property. I just don't know what else to say about that. I feel that many of your members understand this as well. It's happening, and we have to enforce the laws.
Essex?
Expanding a bit on some of the problems that downtown businesses are suffering. Yes, there were some violence with the protests. There was violence there, but even before the protests and even after, there are downtown businesses who say that repeated low-level crimes, such as shoplifting, have contributed to their decision to close downtown. For both of you, what is your approach to stopping these repeat offenders? And Sarah Nelson, the question goes to you first.
That's what I was referring to as a small business owner, because repeat offenses do take a toll on the businesses that are repeatedly hit. So I am all for diversion programs that keep people out of jail, but the city does need to focus on repeat offenders to make sure that that they are offered solutions, and I will get to the root causes. If some of the root causes are addiction and mental illness, then that is what we should be offering people who are repeat offenders.
Nikita Oliver?
Yeah, and to address the question in the chat, no, I'm not saying attacks on businesses are okay. What I am saying is businesses have insurance to address those issues. And if we want to stop what happened last year, we'll actually address the racist, murderous policing that is happening in this nation. That will actually get to the root cause and stop that ultimately. In regards to the question, we incarcerate as a nation 25% of the world's incarcerated population and yet have 5% of the world's population. We have more investment in militarized policing than almost any other comparable nation in the world, and yet we are not the safest country in the world. That should tell us that policing and jails actually don't work. And we know that it's not a deterrent for quote unquote low-level offenses, misdemeanors. And misdemeanors in the city of Seattle are often criminalizing poverty. It kind of flies in the face to talk about the racial wealth gap or the fact that we have thousands of people on the edge of eviction or many workers who are not able to return to work yet, and then turn around and say, we're going to criminalize you for stealing the things that you needed. An example of this is Goodwill, where we've actually had hundreds of folks charged with crimes for stealing from Goodwill, a place where it's donation based, and many of whom are folks without homes. So I think it's important that if we want to stop the end result, rather than continue to rely on punitive systems that fail at deterrence, we actually start to get to the root causes, which is gross racialized wealth inequality in this city.
Sarah Nelson, 30 seconds.
Every time that my business is broken into or damaged somehow, I have to weigh, do I put in a claim and then have my premiums go up? $1,500. Is it really worth that? How long will it take? You know, is the time that it will take to make up that amount in increased premiums really worth putting in a claim? This is how business works, Nikita. We make decisions. We have to take a pragmatic approach to our cash flow issues, and so it is not trivial. And you know, insurance isn't just there to pay for these things. And so anyway, that's all I want to say about that.
And Nikita Oliver, 30 seconds.
Contrary to popular belief, I'm actually also a small business owner, and I raise nearly $1 million a year for an organization. I also have to prioritize things around what do we do when we need to file insurance claims. Not long ago, a window was broken and a laptop was stolen out of our classroom, a laptop used to support young people who don't have access to technology. I also had to make the hard decision between calling the police and figuring out a way to file that report in order to get insurance to replace it. Ultimately, what I decided was not to do that, because there are many people around our building that do not have access to the things that they need. We worked with our community to later replace that laptop, and I do understand the challenging decisions that have to be made. I would like break-ins to stop, but I think the best way to do that is to actually address the underlying causes of it, rather than to continue to criminalize poverty and continue to get the same results. We keep doing the same thing and getting the same results. That is the definition of insanity.
Thank you both. Let's move on to the issue of chronic homelessness. Supporters of Charter Amendment 29 are in the final stages of collecting signatures to get it on the November ballot. Also known as Compassion Seattle, its policies would be locked into the city's constitution for 6 years. Please explain your position on Amendment 29. And Nikita Oliver, would you go first?
I do not support Amendment 29. One, it is a change to our charter amendment, to our city charter that would make our responses to the housing and homelessness crisis inflexible. We would be required to do things in a particular way. And if we ever needed to change that as the crisis changes, we would not be able to do that. Secondly, It requires 2,000 new units of emergency or permanent housing, a broad category that includes everything from enhanced 24/7 shelters to permanent housing within 1 year. And the first 1,000 units are to be due within 6 months. It is not likely that those will be actually permanent units. And then the ones that happen in the next 6 months probably will not be permanent supportive, which many people need support. Compassion Seattle also admits that its formula for the 2021 city budget would have produced a fund of about 129 million, which is only about 16 million more than what we actually budget. And there is no clear revenue stream. Reality is this is a response, but it is a surface level response that does not have a multifaceted approach. And the last thing I will say is young people from the Lived Experience Coalition said they were never invited in to talk about what would actually make this charter amendment useful for them as people who have experienced housing instability and homelessness. And we have to talk to the people who are experiencing it first.
Sarah Nelson.
I do support Amendment 29 with some reservations, which I'll get to. But when I first heard about it, what I liked the most is that it creates a dedicated funding stream to mental health and substance abuse disorder treatment. We do not control those dollars right now. They flow through the county. It's high time that we actually have the ability to grow capacity and provide more of that service. So that is the first thing. And then its aggressive goal for housing production is also a big plus and very necessary. The broad coalition that came behind it, when you've got the Public Defenders Association and the Chamber and DSA in the same room talking, I feel that that is progress. I do think that a charter amendment that expires in 6 years is questionable. I am concerned about the impact to basic services, which are paid for by the general fund. However, I recognize that this is a charter amendment to do an end run around an ineffective city council that has not been able to move the needle on homelessness in years. It was declared an emergency in 2015, and the problem keeps getting worse.
You'll each get 30 seconds as a rebuttal. As you do so, address the concern of critics that the charter amendment leads to more sweeps. And Nikita Oliver, you're first for a 30-second rebuttal.
Yeah, it does. It codifies sweeps. It essentially gives the call to continue to move people so long as there's quote unquote someplace that they can go to. That's also unclear what that actually means. It would codify them. I also want to address that the Public Defender Association is a nonprofit, and the actual public defenders of our city have come out and said that they oppose Compassion Seattle.
Sarah Nelson.
Repeat the question, please.
Yes, just as you do your rebuttal, address the criticism that the charter amendment would lead to more sweeps.
It's sad is too soft of a word to describe the fact that our whole conversation around how to reduce the number of people living in shelters has come down to a fight about sweeps or no sweeps. The standard should be people don't need to live in encampments. And when I am asked, so you support sweeps? I've decided that I'm going to respond by saying, so do you support encampments? So the fact is that this is not this Charter Amendment 29 does not just treat surface level issues. It treats the root causes, again, mental illness and substance abuse. That is a good place to start.
I need to stop you there. Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, in the interest of watching the clock, we are at halftime here in the debate. And so we're going to call an audible that we want to let both candidates know. In the interest of getting through more topics, we're going to limit the rebuttals so we can cover more topics here in the remaining time that we have scheduled for this debate. So to build on what Essex's last question was, there are many people downtown who believe that visible encampments are a deterrent to economic recovery, scare tourists and customers off. So where do you draw the line on whether tents should be on city streets, and what do you do about people who refuse services? Sarah, we'll give that question to you first.
I do not believe that tents should be on city streets. I believe that people should have 4 walls and a door. And as for service resistors, there are some cities that have instituted laws saying that if you're contacted a certain amount of time and you refuse services, then it is jail if you don't move. That's a pretty forceful response. But I think that if we're able to offer more housing solutions, which is what Charter Amendment 29 seeks to do, that we won't have so many people living on our city streets.
Nikita?
Sweeping people is a public health hazard. It also disrupts the small amount of stability people have created. And it also happens usually within a 3-day period. As someone who has worked in social work nearly the majority of my career, I know that building rapport is key in order for folks to want to trust to access services. Many of the folks who are living outside have already been harmed by systemic violence. And as a result, they don't trust people just off top. We need to be doing things to provide radical accessibility for people, access to places to wash clothes, restrooms, places to store things, access to medical care, mental health services, and supports for drug users when they want it. But I want to be clear, mental health crises and drug use is not the primary reason why people are outside. It is because this woefully unaffordable city means many people teeter on the edge. A lot of folks lose their homes because they're living paycheck to paycheck, and that's how they find themselves outside, and then may choose to cope or find that they're in mental health crises because of the experience of being without a home.
Nikita, thank you. Essex?
Well, let's talk about short-term housing solutions. So what do you think of buying hotels? What do you think of the tiny house villages? What do you think of using city parks to house the homeless? And what about those who are living in cars or RVs? Nikita, the question goes to you first.
Yeah, we need short-term, mid-term, long-term solutions. Short-term is continuing to invest in things like tiny house villages, is continuing to invest in the hotel model, moving away from congregate shelters. We do have funding between us and at the county level, and there's a lot of funding being leveraged, the ARPA funds, to be able to buy hotels, to expand the Just Cares program, which means people get to have safety, running water, warmth, and access to services. I also think that we need to be thinking about our midterm and long-term solutions. Long-term, build social, green, affordable housing. The private market has no reason to correct itself. We need co-ops and community land trusts. And midterm, really considering how do these things intersect and grow us into a deeper solution that actually addresses the root causes of homelessness. Racial wealth gap, I'm going to keep saying that. We cannot pay deference to it and then fail to actually respond to it. And we need progressive taxation. We are putting the burden of addressing this issue in the communities that are already rent burdened, the communities that are already transportation burdened, on the workers who already can't find affordable housing, while those who actually are benefiting from the boom in this region are not paying their fair share to address the crisis.
Sarah Nelson.
I agree with Nikita that we need all tools at our disposal, short, medium, and long term. So that includes tiny homes and hotels, etc. The gold standard is permanent supportive housing, and I support Third Door Coalition's goals to bring those units online faster and less expensively by public-private partnerships. There is a role for the private sector in this solution, and also the bringing them on through land use changes and building code changes. That is what we should be doing to eventually provide the services that are most robust for people that need it.
Okay. Let me give each of you just an additional 10 seconds to focus on one part of the question. Does your short-term solution include allowing people to camp in portions of city parks? And Sarah Nelson, you first.
No.
Nikita Oliver?
Yes, with a plan for radical accessibility. If we stop the sweeps, we will have much more money to be able to help people with ways of keeping it clean, having hygiene and supports, and then we can build relationship and rapport with our social workers in the Human Services Department, and the other folks that we contract with can actually be in space with folks, build those relationships to help move them into safer conditions while we do the work of building things out.
Thank you both. Chris?
Yeah, and you both just touched on this, the idea of permanent solutions. I recently met a man at the Inn at Queen Anne who said that he was living on the streets for more than a decade, and he found that permanent supportive housing there and that it has saved his life. What is the definition, though, of a permanent solution in your mind for the chronically unsheltered, for someone who may have mental or addiction issues, and what should be the limit of government support? Nikita, let's start with you.
So I don't think there is a limit of government support when it comes to building healthier, safer cities. One of my mentors tells me that health is wealth. And if we think of that in the context of our city, making sure that all of our residents are healthy and safe and supported is actually going to make us a wealthier city. In the context of providing people with support, we know that the hotel model has actually been extremely effective. We've heard that from residents. We have money at the municipal and the county level that we can leverage for more hotels to increase the Just Cares program as permanent supportive services. And while we're doing that, really deeply focusing on ending exclusionary zoning so that we have the opportunity to have more infill models, to have more access for affordable housing, partnering with our nonprofits that we know how to leverage building that supportive housing services and having labor harmony agreements to ensure that workers are protected, and investing. We need more progressive taxation so that we have a larger amount of revenue generated to meet that 400 million to 1 billion a year in our region for 10 years to be able to build the housing we need to get out of this crisis and ensure that we have enough for everyone that's coming to our region.
Sarah, same question.
All right, well, before we talk about more revenue, we should talk about leadership. And I do not see council demonstrating real leadership on this issue. So the city should be responding to our homelessness crisis as a public health crisis, which it is, with resolve and compassion and planning and real solutions. It's immoral that we're in this situation right now. And so to me, what permanent solutions mean is precisely the services that I've already mentioned many times. Now, one thing that the Third Door Coalition brings up and that was touched on before is that, you know, drug abuse is not necessarily a root cause, but it is perpetuated in encampments. And we do need to return our parks to the commons. And so it's a community response, and it should be modeled on a public health response.
Essex?
The city has budgeted $165 million on homelessness this year. More than $500 million has been budgeted by the city since 2017. The new high earners payroll tax adds another $200 million. My question is that enough? And what is your stand on the Seattle Chamber's lawsuit to overturn that payroll tax? Nikita Oliver, please go first.
Yeah, I think the problem with how we have been addressing homelessness is that we're addressing symptoms, and we get very caught up in talking about the behaviors of folks without homes without actually talking about the systemic causes of why people are without homes in the first place. So I think really deeply focusing our dollars on housing, the short-term, mid-term, long-term housing supports. And then as we provide supportive services, not forcing people to have to get into those. Often housing has really high barriers for folks that do use drugs or folks that are struggling with mental health. And those barriers keep people from getting into housing. We need low barrier shelter. And in regards to that lawsuit, I support the Jumpstart tax. We need progressive taxation. People should be paying their fair share. Those who make the least are paying the most, and those who make the most are often paying the least in our region. And that's just simply unacceptable. It also is a very brittle system. And in the midst of this recession, it has shown us that as we've seen deficits to things like all of the dollars that are supposed to fund ST3. I mean, our dependence upon a regressive tax system is making it impossible for us to address homelessness, to address a climate catastrophe, to have equitable transportation, and to have housing for all.
Nikita, quickly, what additional progressive revenue taxes would you like to see?
Yeah, I think there's a number of them. We can raise the REIT. We can have vacancy taxes. We can have a speculation tax. We can increase Jumpstart. We are only at a small amount of what Jumpstart could actually be. There is the 1% income tax, and obviously there's a conversation about rebates and those kinds of legalities that need to happen so that that tax is actually equitable. But we are not out of options for ways to be raising progressive revenue.
Okay. And Sarah Nelson, as you address the question, I'll give you some additional time as well. Is the city is spending enough money on homelessness? What is your stand on the Seattle Chamber's lawsuit to overturn the payroll tax?
Jumpstart was the largest tax increase in Seattle history that did not go before the voters. I opposed it because I oppose anything that inhibits job creation and higher pay for workers. So again, I don't want to talk about more funding before we talk about whether or not council can spend resources responsibly. They have not proven that they can do so. The budget for homelessness increased, it doubled in the past 3 years, and the problem got worse. So when is enough enough? The Jumpstart tax, yes, was targeting big businesses with large payrolls, but the business community is an ecosystem, and what you do to large businesses flows through the economy and impacts small businesses. So again, let's get over this us and them and put forward effective strategies first, and then figure out how to pay for them.
Okay, very good. Chris?
All right, let's start talking about the downtown recovery. As we sit here today in this forum, you both know that we are on Zoom, and a lot of people, a lot of employees have adapted to working in a remote environment. So the question, and we'll start with Sarah, is how do you encourage businesses, large and small, to return people to downtown? Do you offer, say, financial incentives to businesses to require workers to come downtown, Sarah?
I think the first thing to do to encourage workers to come back downtown is for the city to invest in downtown's recovery. That means recruiting businesses to come to downtown, actively going out and courting businesses to come here, helping businesses reopen. What do they need to reopen to pay for to damage to the buildings? What do we need to do to make downtown more inviting, more safe, so that businesses don't feel as though their employees are at risk? That's how we bring more workers downtown.
Nikita, same question.
Yeah, so the council has invested $2 million to the Seattle Rescue Plan, specifically in supporting businesses and reopening. Some of those dollars can be for technical support, but there's also dollars that are being invested in arts and culture, some of which are very targeted at downtown, acknowledging our hospitality workers. I'm really honored to be endorsed by Unite Here Local 8 because of my commitment to hospitality, but I'm also an artist. I'm endorsed by IATSE Local 15, acknowledging that I know the challenges of those who work in the arts and who work in our hospitality industry. And it's going to require some investment in reopening up. Some other things that we can be doing is, I know those dollars can be used for technical support, but we can also be fast tracking certain permits that folks might need in order to open up. And then having a free ride zone. I'm endorsed by ATU 587. And one of the big things they've said to help the downtown corridor be active is having a free ride zone actually makes people want to stay in downtown and move through downtown efficiently.
Essex?
That anticipates my next question. And Nikita, you get a chance to expand on this. Do you support making public transit free of charge, even outside the free ride zone you're thinking of there?
Yes, I do. And because of issues around things like the racial wealth gap, if we look at families that are cost burdened in housing, they're spending about 30% on rent. They're also typically transportation burdened, spending about 16% on transportation. Having free transportation during the pandemic was huge for workers, especially those that were experiencing the economic recession and that having deep impacts on their income. Free transportation also is going to be key to us building a city that is able to reach our climate goals. We want to get to net zero. And by making transportation free and accessible, more and more people will be willing to use it. But that also has to come with increased service. So both making it free, increasing our service, and being very thoughtful about our Seattle subway plan and our light rail and how we build density. These things all combined, it's an intersectional issue, are going to make free transit such a wonderful thing for everyone in our community.
How do you pay for it though?
I think there are things that we can leverage. So we have to work with our county partners. And there are taxes that can happen at the county level that would allow us to bring in more subsidies for transportation. I think at the city level, we were able to make it possible during a pandemic in the midst of a recession. We were looking at a $300 million budget shortfall. So I think what that actually tells us is it's a policy decision. How we choose to invest our money is who and what we value. And we do have dollars at the municipal level that we could further invest in free transportation. Again, I've already said progressive taxation, and then working with our county and our state partners to get ourselves all the way there it's actually very doable if we set our sights on it and we make the policy decisions to make it a reality.
Sarah Nelson, free public transit, and how do we pay for it?
I support bringing back the free ride zone downtown and perhaps the expansion of a model like the UPass all over the city. It should be means tested, however, but I do not support free transit for everyone. Why would that will decrease fare? Well, it will wipe out fare box revenue, and I don't know how we're going to pay, how we're going to fill that in. Why would we let affluent people off the hook for paying for their bus ride? Why would we let businesses off the hook for contributing to the commute trip reduction plan? They're subsidizing their employees' ORCA cards. And so we need to maintain that funding and figure out a way, and it's complicated because there are 8 jurisdictions that are involved in the ORCA pass, but figure out a way to means test and provide lower cost transit for people that really do need it.
Thank you both.
Let's keep talking transit. The First Avenue streetcar is a project that's had many stops and starts, and the pandemic seems to have derailed it, at least for the time being. The question is, are you in favor of revisiting this issue to connect the existing First Hill and South Lake Union streetcars, or do you think those resources should be spent elsewhere? Sarah, let's start with you.
All right, I was looking for my notes on this. I believe that it should be completed with some reservation because basically you've got 2 lines that should be connected, yes. And that will increase that will maximize both lines. And there's already a lot of sunk cost in this project. I recognize that it's over budget. However, I do believe that it should be completed for the reasons that I just stated. There have been people that have said that Metro could provide those service hours, but we've got a project on our hands that is partially complete, and we should complete it.
Nikita, do you think the streetcar, the First Avenue streetcar should be completed?
Yes, and I think finishing the city center connection is just going to be useful continuing to achieve our climate goals. And I think it's something that many of our urbanist community is looking for and hoping to have. I also want to just backtrack just a little bit about free transit. If transit were free and corporations and wealthy folks were paying their fair share, we wouldn't actually be letting anyone off the hook. We would just all be experiencing this public good that we all paid in to see exist.
Essex.
Thank you both. Another idea that people were talking about, really had some momentum before the pandemic, was the idea of congestion pricing in the downtown core. Nikita, would you take this question first? Are you in favor of congestion pricing for downtown?
I think that congestion pricing could be useful for funding transportation. I think it also has some very serious equity issues. Reality is there are workers that drive into downtown. There are, both for the city and the county, but also folks that are involved in construction. And if we were to have congestion pricing without some sort of equity measure to ensure that workers are not taking on, once again, the burden of our regressive tax system, we could actually just increase the amount that they're paying for a system that's already failing to meet their needs. So yes, and there has to be a clear, very strong, convincing equity solution to ensure that we protect those who are already paying the most.
Sarah Nelson?
I'm interested that that you now support it. I believe that congestion pricing should be pursued. The majority of people who are coming into downtown who are low income, if they drive, also have to park their cars. So basically, this would be taxing wealthy people that come into downtown, and we could use that on more transit or other infrastructure projects. So absolutely, we've got a problem that we're an employment hub, obviously, and folks are coming into downtown, and we have to figure out a way to have folks that are using our roads pay to maintain them.
Thank you both. Chris?
All right, we are in the home stretch now. So let's talk about City Hall working with the business community. I don't think it's any secret that there are multiple people in downtown who were not fans of the head tax that was abolished and the current jumpstart tax, which we've talked about quite a bit during this forum. They probably also argue that they weren't given a seat at the table in these discussions. So we will start with you, Sarah. How would you handle any sort of discussion on business taxes? And are you concerned at all that a major employer could move elsewhere out of the city based on the recent events?
I am concerned about that. I'm concerned about our business climate in general. Like I alluded to in my opening statement, this us and them attitude toward the business community. We should be treating our business community as an asset that we can be thankful for. We shouldn't just be conducting a check the box outreach process when when legislation is about to be introduced or when it's being rammed through. We actually need to ask business, hey, what do you think about this? Not just invite them to the table, but work with the business community to craft solutions, to partner with them. And so that's why you need a small business owner on city council, because I come with the perspective that we have something to give and we want to be part of the solution.
And Nikita, the same question for you. Would you be willing to sit at the table with the business community to discuss any sort of future business taxes like the ones that you talked about previously? And are you worried about business moving elsewhere because of the recent events?
No, I'm not worried about business moving elsewhere. And yes, I don't have a problem having a conversation with anyone. I meet with lots of people. I mean, I'm here at this event. While I think I probably disagree with a number of things that maybe some DSA members might support, in reality, I'm very open to conversation. Now, that doesn't change the fact that I think that businesses have a huge power and privilege dynamic. And I don't even think we can say that generally across the board. When I look at businesses in the South End where I live, these small businesses and micro businesses often don't have a very strong say in what happens in city policy. I think even in the business community, there is a highly racialized and classist way of moving that excludes some businesses from the conversations. At the end of the day, what I care about is policies that get to the root cause of what our city is dealing with. I want us out of the housing crisis. I want us to have transportation that's for everyone. And I want us to address our climate issues and have a public health and safety system that works for everyone. That is going to require having an acknowledgement through our Race and Social Justice Initiative that there are people who historically and presently have been marginalized and disenfranchised from having an equitable voice in the conversation. And business often has a very large voice.
Thank you, Nikita. And Sarah, Essex?
It is the hottest day on record in Seattle. So let's talk about climate change. And Nikita, this question goes to you first. What will you do to ensure that Seattle meets its greenhouse gas goals to address climate change?
Yeah, we're in a climate catastrophe. We're not just in climate change. This is a literal catastrophe and it's happening right now. How do we address it? End exclusionary zoning. So we're able to build more density throughout the city and to build our housing plan in lockstep with our transportation plan. So ensuring that we have lots of work, reinforce social, green, affordable housing around our transportation hubs so that workers can go to school, work, services, and amenities with ease. We can decrease that travel time. And we really have to start thinking about building all of our new buildings green. While transportation might be the highest issue when it comes to emissions, buildings are the fastest growing emission that we're facing. And so that's why it's really important that we get off of fossil fuels and natural gas. And that means having a just transition. We need to be able to help our workers transition into a green economy. I'm really honored to have the endorsement of the MLK Labor Council because of my commitment to building green and a just transition. And we're gonna have to do that in partnership with them to ensure that we meet everyone's needs.
Sarah Nelson, how would you address climate change?
Well, I'm the only candidate in this race with a long track record as an environmental advocate. I'm endorsed by Dennis Hayes and Ken Letterman, other environmental leaders, for my work in Richard Conlin's office and also at Fremont Brewing. We lead the craft beer industry and sustainability. And it was actually Richard Conlin who started the Green Building Program, and we changed the land use code to allow for living building pilot project to expand. So here's what I would do. We need to incentivize the adoption and the production of green technologies by the private sector, because we're not going to get to our climate goals just by focusing on city facilities and electric city fleets. We've got to get business to step up and take the next, and to invest in sustainability as well. And so I can lead on that. And I've been proposing expanding City Lights Efficiency Services Program, SPU's conservation program. I was on the advisory committee of EnviroStars, which helps businesses plan their investments in sustainability. This is what we need to do urgently, and I can be a bridge to the private sector to help that along.
Sarah, next question is for you.
And also, of course, density. That's an obvious. I'm also on the record as pro-growth and pro-density.
Thank you, Sarah. Next question goes to you first. Do you support commercial rent control to help small businesses?
In theory, yes, but it gets back to also any kind of rent control. I thought you meant rent.
Yes,
no.
yes. And let me be clear about the question. Do you support commercial rent control to help small businesses?
No, because I think that rent control does not end up, producing the effects needed. Rent control, whether it's commercial or residential, ends up decreasing supply, ends up hurting the providers who need to maintain their buildings. There are many studies that show that it has the exact opposite effect, which is to raise rents. We don't want to go, I don't think that it should be our goal to be San Francisco or New York. And so therefore, yes, we need to help small businesses, but rent control I don't think is the right approach. I would love it, however, as a small business owner, but I think that we really do have to think about how do building owners pay their mortgages.
Nikita Oliver, commercial rent control, do you support that?
Absolutely. Commercial rent control in Seattle is good for small businesses, and the city council already passed legislation. Unfortunately, the prohibitions in that legislation only remained in effect until the civil emergency is terminated. And I think that we need to make that ordinance permanent. It provides protections in the form of rent control, repayment plan requirements, prohibitions on late fees, interest and other charges. And some of those are relevant to the crisis, but there are other pieces of that just long-term will be very useful for supporting our small businesses. And I also want to say, I also have a track record in doing climate justice work. I'm endorsed by Michael Bryan and Sunrise Seattle, and have worked on things like No Doppel, our divestment campaign from Wells Fargo, and did Green New Deal work.
Thank you both. Chris?
Yeah, speaking of rent control, it has been a key element of existing Councilmember Kshama Sawant's platform. And I bring this up because she has been hypercritical of large businesses in downtown. And Nikita, you just talked about your endorsements, multiple endorsements. You've also been endorsed by Shama Sawant. What do you think she's done well for Seattle, and how do you think your leadership style is different than hers?
I think Shama Sawant has held a really important line in City Council about acknowledging the needs of workers, addressing the racial wealth gap, calling for not just rent control, but honestly a full toolkit of a renter's bill of rights, renters protections across the board. And as we've been in the midst of this moratorium, the one thing that we know is if the moratorium is not coupled with real cash assistance and a toolkit of renters' rights, we're actually not going to solve the crisis. We're going to get to the end of the moratorium and many people are going to lose their homes. So I actually applaud Councilmember Sawant's work for really holding the line on these key issues that impact our low-income workers, our BIPOC communities very deeply. How am I different? I'm an organizer. And I have shown myself as a grassroots organizer across multiple communities. If you look at the endorsements on our website, you will see endorsements from nonprofit leaders to grassroots organizers to the labor community, tons of labor endorsements, to groups like Puget Sound Sage leaders, Sunrise Movement Seattle. You'll see folks at the city council level, Tammy Morales, Teresa Mosqueda, Guillermo Zahala at the King County level, and then State Senator Rebecca Saldana, State Rep Kirsten Harris-Talley, Tara Simmons, Jesse Johnson. I have a multiplicity of relationships that make me a quality organizer for moving forward the issues that we need. Yes, I am also an activist, but I am also an attorney and someone who is very deeply interested in policy, so much so that I read our Freight Master Plan. So I promise you that I'm very interested in bringing forward effective policies, but also galvanizing community to have our voices heard in City Hall and move forward the things that change the material conditions of those most impacted by crises in our city.
Nikita, thank you. Essex.
Sarah Nelson, you have spoken about your history at City Hall as a staffer of Richard Conlon. That's a plus that you've spoken about. Now, Conlon was actually defeated by Sawant way back in the day. Are you supporting the effort to recall Councilmember Sawant, and will you be able to work together if you're both serving on the council?
First, I just want to go back to the last question because I think that rent control was conflated with other supports for renters. I am for direct cash payments to renters and so that they can pay back rent, et cetera, and not get evicted, commercial or residential. Sawant did beat my boss in 2013. So I do not live in District 3, so I am not involved in the recall, but I'm just going to have to trust the judge on this one. Said that the elements of the recall petition did meet a threshold to pursue. I do believe that I can work with Councilmember Sawant if she stays on council because we do have some things in common. We do care about workers. And that's why you need someone who is going to fight for a strong economy.
Thank you. Chris?
All right, we've made it through one of the hottest mornings in Seattle history. So hopefully everybody's doing okay in their Zoom rooms. We are about to draw to a close and have covered a lot of ground. But before we go, we'd like to offer both candidates a final chance to make their case for the primary election. And by virtue of that virtual coin flip, we will begin with Sarah Nelson. And Sarah, you have 60 seconds.
Okay, one moment, please. All right, well, a lot of contrast was drawn out in this conversation. Thank you very much for convening this. There's no question we're going through tough times, but I always say with crisis comes opportunity, and we've got the opportunity for a major political reset in this town. And it starts by electing a candidate who you can hold accountable for delivering measurable results instead of empty rhetoric. A candidate focused on effective, doable, specificity-oriented solutions to very complex problems. A candidate who basically cares about downtown workers, businesses, and residents. So I'm endorsed by the firefighters, the Seattle Building and Construction Trades Council, the iron workers, the plumbers and pipe fitters. Why would labor support a business owner? Well, it's because we are aligned in our goals of a strong economy, good paying jobs, and a livable city. That is DSA's vision as well. And I'm hoping for your support and your top ranking. And I very much appreciate speaking with you all today. You can learn more about all my other positions on my website, sarahforcitycouncil.com.
Thank you, Sarah. Nikita, you have 60 seconds.
So our city has a huge racial wealth gap, a housing affordability crisis, and a major need for equitable transportation and social affordable green housing. Too often has our community been thwarted in its responsibility to pay its fair share and to truly honor the human dignity of all workers and residents, including our residents without homes. I do not think housing for all, transportation for all, meeting basic needs, achieving our climate goals, and progressive taxation are too radical for a truly progressive city. In fact, there are cities that already do this. I believe that a healthy city is one where we prioritize the health of our most vulnerable residents. A healthy city is a sustainable city, a green city, a worker-led city, a city where everyone pays their fair share, where we have true public safety for everyone. And I know that I am capable of doing that and delivering on policies that make deep impacts the material conditions of those who have the least right now. And I'm currently endorsed by the MLK Labor Council, which makes me the labor candidate, UFCW 21, Unite Here Local 8, SEIU 925, SEIU 6, Seattle Education Association, and many other unions, because my vision and previous work towards building a healthy, green, sustainable community actually reflects what our city needs.
Thank you both. Thank you both, Nikita Oliver and Sarah Nelson, for participating in today's debate. Thanks to the Downtown Seattle Association for putting all this together. Brianna Thomas was unable to attend due to a scheduling conflict today. The Downtown Seattle Association reminds all of us to remember to vote in the August 3rd primary election. The top two candidates advance to the fall election. And Chris and I hope to see you back here tomorrow when the top candidates for mayor will sit down with us at the same time for our forum on that race. Until then, on behalf of the DSA, we thank you for your time. Have a good day.
Thank you.